This is very much an inspirational talk, not a practical one. I'm going to talk about game designers, and specifically I'm going to talk about designer notebooks. The published title of this talk was The Designer's Notebook, but really the title that I think is more appropriate is Designer Notebook Zero, and you'll see what I mean by the end of the talk. But before I get to what I mean by Designer Notebooks and Designer Notebook Zero, I want to talk a little bit about the inspiration for the talk, like the backstory of why I'm giving this talk in the first place. And it started Meaningful Play 2018 when Alec Halika, who certainly has his share of personal demons, gave a keynote at Meaningful Play. I was there, and he told a story about how he fell into a severe depression during the development grind on Night in the Woods. And this is shockingly common thing in our industry. At the time, he was in Canada and was able to get treatment for free, return to work, and finish one of the best games to come out that year. And this story kind of hit me hard emotionally because I realized that if he had been living in the US, where you have to actually pay for your own healthcare, it's very likely he would not be alive today. And if that were true, then Night in the Woods probably would not exist. Something's going wrong with my thing where it's auto-advancing. And everyone in our timeline who found meaning in this game would not have it exist. We would be poorer for it not existing. And the shocking thing about this to me is we wouldn't even know that we were missing something, right? And then I realized this probably has happened in the US to someone else. Probably is happening right now. Probably will happen in the future. There are life-altering, amazing games out there that should exist, but they won't. And when I realized this, I went through an actual grieving process. Like, I've lost loved ones in the past, but this was different. In many ways, it was harder for me. Because how do you grieve for the loss of someone that you've never met, that you never will, that you'll never even know that they existed? I wasn't just grieving over half-finished games, it was larger than that. It was also the games that never get started, because we all have too many ideas and not enough time to make them all. So like everyone who calls themselves a game designer, I get new ideas for games that I think would be awesome on a semi-regular basis. Here are 3 of the ideas that I've had that I've prototyped. And there's 3 types of ideas that I get. The first kind is the kind that I'm compelled to make right now. I will be up till 4 a.m. for several nights making a prototype because I am compelled to do so. I call this just being an occupational hazard of being a game designer. After the first few times I've done this, my wife now understands that if I say I'm being attacked by a game idea, she knows what that means. For me, this happens maybe 2 or 3 times per year on a good year, but I know it varies a lot with all of us. So at the other extreme, the second type of ideas I get are for games that I would love to play, but I don't really feel the need to make them myself. I'd be perfectly happy if someone else made them, I just want to play. And so for those ideas, I will not work on them immediately. Instead, I'll post them on social media. If someone picks it up and makes it, great. If not, no loss, I wouldn't have gotten around to it myself anyway. And if it didn't compel anyone else to make it, well, probably not that as great an idea as I thought it was. I know you probably won't be able to read all of these, but you can always search my Twitter for game idea or challenge for game designers, if you really care to find them all. I always tag it as one of those. And there's a third category of my ideas, where it's not immediately compelling to me, but it is something that I do eventually want to work on myself. This is something where I don't just think it would be fun to play, I also think it would be fun to make. Or it's something where I feel like I am the person who has to make this. It wouldn't be okay if someone else did. I want a hand in the creative process. And for these, I put it in my designer notebook. These are photos from actual tweets when I asked Twitter, hey, game designers, what do you use as a design notebook? So if one of these belongs to someone in the audience, thank you for your cooperation. We all have a design notebook. Every game designer I know has one of these things. For some of it's a literal notebook. For some it's a stack of notebooks. For some it's just loose papers or post-it notes. For some it's a personal Trello board, or a Google Keep, or a Notion Wiki, or Evernote or OneNote, a Notes app on their phone, a set of Google Docs, a GitHub repo, a master spreadsheet to keep everything organized, some combination of these things. There doesn't appear to be an industry standard here. Like, every game designer I know kind of has their own system. The only standard is that every designer has a design notebook of some kind, either physical or virtual. And this was actually surprising for me to find. Usually with game designers with things like this, we all end up doing something independently that ends up being the same thing. In this case, it's very different. For me, if anyone's curious, my design notebook is a folder on my home computer that I back up regularly, one idea write-up per file in Word. And I'll just dump my idea and any immediate thoughts into the Word doc and just let it sit there. If I get an idea when I'm not at home and I can't just sit down and write it up right then I'll just create I'll write it down in the memo app on my phone and then transfer it to creating a local file when I get home. But for this discussion, the form doesn't actually matter, just the content. The fact is that as game designers, we have ideas, and for most of us, we store them somewhere. And the size of this folder grows over time. I generate more ideas that I think are worthwhile than I get to work on up to the proof of concept phase. And every other designer I've ever talked to that's been doing this for a while has this pattern too. Our design notebooks expand as long as we're alive because we get ideas faster than we can work on them, especially for those of us who are under non-competes where our current employer forbids us to work on our own projects, or those of us who are in a crunch period where we just don't have any time to pursue our own projects. And so we also tend to be very selective about what ideas we do work on. Non-competes aside, there's an opportunity cost here. Every time I work on a game idea, that means I'm not working on any of my other ideas at that moment. I only have so many years on this planet. I like to joke that I'm immortal, but the reality is that there are only a limited number of games I'm going to be able to make in my lifetime. So while maybe on my day job I'm working on someone's Candy Crush reskin in exchange for the money I need to live, I'm certainly not going to spend my precious solo passion project hours doing something like that. I'm going to do my own cool stuff. And some of my ideas are probably actually kind of good. Some of yours are probably good too. And they're all unique. Like, if everyone listening to this somehow got all of our design notebooks together and compared all the ideas, we would probably have very few duplicates. But when one of us passes away, which will happen to all of us sooner or later, what happens to your notebook? Right? In most cases, our ideas are going to die with us. And that's terrible and frightening to realize that there are countless wonderful, award-winning, life-changing, industry-defining, genre-busting games out there. Games that could change everything, that I will never get to play because their creators will pass away before we make them. So let's just take a moment of silence to honor the designers who have passed on and the amazing games from their design notebooks that we will never get to play as a result. So I decided that I wanted to do something about this, short of becoming immortal. I want all of everyone's truly great ideas that we've been saving up, because we're sure that they'll be brilliant, to actually reach their full potential. I want to see these games of yours. I want to see the games that are capable of, winning awards, changing lives, expanding the boundaries of the medium. And so really, what I want to talk about here in my talk is strategies for how do we preserve these unborn idea children of ours. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I've done, and if you feel the same way, what you can do. So I'm not just a game designer, I also teach game design. Up till the end of last academic year, I was at RIT, currently teaching a class at DigiPen. At RIT, my department had a class called Research Studio, where students make a game under the creative direction of the instructor. So I asked to teach a Research Studio in experimental gameplay. And before the first day of class, what I did was I took my design notebook, I condensed each idea down to a short pitch, like a paragraph or so, and I emailed all of these paragraphs to the entire class. Now, this does mean that I was essentially relinquishing my rights to the IP in this process. But I was okay with this. I would rather have a game that gets made than a non-existent game that I own that I'll never get around to making. And on the first week of class, my students would choose their favorite ideas. I also let them pitch their own, so they were not compelled to work on mine. I also had a graduate assistant who also mostly made prototypes under my direction. Sometimes I'd get an independent study that was like this too, with some students that just wanted to make an experimental game. Here are some examples of games that my students have actually worked on under my direction. And this worked, right? Over the past 5 years, I've had students taking classes with me that would complete maybe 4 or 5 prototypes per semester. And even if some of them weren't mine, some of them were theirs, but some of them were mine. And and for the first time in my entire life, my design notebook actually started shrinking in size. And I cannot understate how freeing this was to see that my idea queue was getting shorter rather than longer. It was amazing. It made me realize, okay, maybe I can do this, without achieving immortality. So that's great if you're a teacher, but what if you don't have a class like this? Or what if you're just not a teacher? I have plenty of friends in the game industry who have ideas that they don't have time to work on. What can they do? And I've had this conversation with quite a few colleagues in the industry. And my first response is, well, I can offer to include your pitch for your idea in my class if you want to pass it to me, but it's up to my students whether they want to bite on it. If you really want it made, my suggestion is to hire a student intern to make a rapid prototype for you. How much does that cost? Well, doing the math, if you're hiring a student over the course of, say, a semester full-time, right, that's 15 weeks, 40 hours per week, $15 at $15 an hour, that comes out to about $9K US dollars per full-time student for a semester. Okay, $9K is a lot of money out of your own pocket, but if you can find a way to justify it through your employer, for example, then that's very cheap by game dev studio standards. Obviously, it's also cheaper if you pay less. If you can bring it down to $10 an hour, that brings it down to a cost of $6K for a full-time student for a semester. If it takes less time to take your idea to prototype form, maybe it only takes a week or two, then it's obviously even much cheaper than that because you're only paying for a couple weeks. This benefits the students too, right? This isn't a purely selfish thing. Students need internships anyway. At RIT, our students, we actually require our students to do a certain number of internships before they graduate as a requirement. Even students that aren't in a program that requires it, they're still hungry for work experience, right? And the idea of someone doing rapid prototypes under the direction of an experienced designer who's been working in the industry for a while, working on one of their passion projects, that would be a dream come true for a lot of students. And if the student screws it up, no big deal. I mean, you weren't going to work on it yourself anyway. It's always possible your idea just wasn't as good as you thought, and the student just saved you a ton of time with a negative proof of concept. So there's really very little to lose here. The other thing that I do is I go through my design notebook once per year and just read through everything. I have to do this for my class anyway, and sometimes I'll just get some new insight that upgrades an idea to a must work on now, or I'll realize that my old idea just wouldn't work, or that someone else made it already, so I can delete it. Some ideas might not be compelling anymore, so I'll just say, I don't need to actually work on this myself. I'll just release it into the wild. So this is also a way that I keep the size of my design notebook down, by just culling it regularly. So what if you're a student and you can't hire someone to do this for you? The good news is that if you're a student, if you're early career, and your design notebook probably just isn't that large yet. So it hasn't expanded beyond the realm of, there's too much to do. So one thing you can do in early career or pre-career, is just make some time, maybe once every few months, or maybe even just once a year, to just do a game jam with your ideas. Just pick one and attack it with a basic prototype. Now, you might not be able to do this as part of an organized game jam like Global Game Jam or Ludum Dare, since those usually have themes or constraints that might just not fit any of your ideas in your notebook. But there's nothing wrong with just rolling your own and just setting aside a weekend to do this for yourself. Even better yet, if you can talk a few friends into doing this with you, you might even be able to swap ideas. Like, each of you puts one of your ideas that you want to explore into a hat, and then you all pull an idea out of the hat and you work on whatever you pulled. Maybe allowing for, letting you swap if you pulled your own. Really, anyone could run something like this. It's pretty easy to set up a jam on itch, in itch.io/jams. But it's usually students who are going to have more spare time to do something like this. Okay, so that's fine for me. That's fine for you on an individual basis, but it doesn't scale. very well. But there is a very simple, low-cost way to do this for all of us at any scale we want, because we have this technology called Google Forms. So I actually took the liberty of going ahead and setting this up already. So I set up a simple form at bit.ly/mygameideas that just takes an idea and dumps it into a spreadsheet. And you can read this spreadsheet. It's publicly readable at bit.ly/yourgameideas. The spreadsheet is read-only except for 2 columns. One to claim an idea as your own if you're working on it, and one for your optional contact info so others could reach out to help if you wanted to. I also take the experimental ideas in the spreadsheet and I do feed it into I have fed it into the experimental gameplay classes that I teach. I'll continue to do this in the future as I teach classes like that. I've had help enough for my own ideas that at this point I want to help everyone else the way that I help myself. So I would encourage if there's any other game developer educators that are listening to this who have similar studio classes, do the same kind of thing. You can feel free to use this as a resource to power your classes. Either add your own ideas or just use this as a resource for your students to mine for inspiration. Or even if your students can work on whatever they want, you can at least let them know that there is a resource out there that they could look through these ideas, or look through them yourself and take a selection of them to use as suggestions. Now, I started out by populating this with ideas from my own design notebook. Really, all of them. I have taken my design notebook, and I've actually made it public. And this is a very rare thing. Usually, game designers keep our design notebooks very secret and very close to the vest. And I think part of the reason we keep a notebook and make it private is not actually the fear of theft. One of the most common questions I get asked as a professional game designer is whether I'm worried that someone will steal my ideas. And we all have a stock answer to that no, the idea is nothing, the execution is everything, so no, I'm not afraid of people stealing my ideas. If someone takes my idea and makes it into a game, then first off, they're probably not going to make the same game I would have made. But second, if they make the game, even if it is the game I would have made, or if it's better, great! I can pay $20 on Steam for it and play it, rather than having to spend several years of my life working on it. $20 for several years is a bargain. And I suspect most other designers feel this way about their ideas too. So no, I don't think that the reason we keep our design notebook secret is because of fear of theft. I think the real reason most designers keep their notebooks tightly guarded is impostor syndrome. It's the fear that if someone sees that maybe my ideas aren't as good as I think they are, that if someone actually sees my ideas written out, they'll think that my ideas are bad. And they'll realize that I'm not actually a good game designer after all. And you might wonder, well, okay, why did I make my notebook public if I'm worried about this? And the answer is I am afraid of this too, but I'm okay taking this risk. Partly, I feel secure enough in my position that I can afford to take a hit to my rep if I have a few stupid ideas in there. And either way, I benefit by receiving feedback. If someone calls me out and says, hey, Ian, this idea is stupid, it would never work, well, great, I can eliminate it from my notebook. That helps me. And hey, if your ideas are better than mine, then you can submit them, feel free to submit them there, and feel smugly superior to me while letting me know what's wrong with my ideas, so we all win. So I would ask you if you have the courage to join me and share your own ideas with the world, either on my site or just through your own means, however you feel comfortable doing it. Or else just read my ideas and other people's ideas on the site and work on them in a game jam or something if you feel inspired. We talk about inbox 0 being this professional ideal for email, where you have your email inbox has no unread emails. But what I think is a more worthwhile goal for a game designer is designer notebook 0. We have no unexplored game ideas. So maybe together we can make sure that we never lose a truly great idea ever again. That is my talk. Thank you for coming.